Years ago, when I was just out of college, I had a friend who was a terrible driver. She'd be driving along and simply stop paying attention to the road, spending alarming stretches of time focused on the passenger or the radio, or maybe something she was eating while in the car. Miraculously, she never actually got into a huge accident, but every time she drove, she'd cut other drivers off, blow through stop signs or red lights, and wander from her lane into the adjacent one, things like that. Drivers around her would become enraged that they'd have to slam on their brakes or swerve to avoid her, and pedestrians would yell obscenities at her. The weirdest thing about all of this is that she'd always respond with indignation, believing that they should have stopped or slowed down or waited for her to do whatever she wanted. She always thought it was someone else's fault, and as far as she was concerned, she somehow always had the right of way. To say that she drove with a sense of entitlement would be a major understatement. As polarity increases, so too does entitlement. Those who are firmly rooted in the old consciousness, and even some who are exploring the new, but aren't as mindful or self-aware as they could be, are demanding more time, more money, more attention, more everything, for no reason other than they feel they deserve it. And it's mostly irrelevant to them how it impacts others. Today, we're going to address where this pattern comes from and what the little known and huge consequences to our personal and spiritual advancement are when we run this distortion pattern but don't address it. And after the discussion, we get to the most important part of this episode. The group frequency calibration at the end is where the frequency work happens and where change actually occurs. So be sure to listen to that. Without releasing distortion patterns targeted by the GFC, the change you want will be more difficult to attain because you haven't addressed the root of the issue. My name is Karen Cheong, and today in Mastering Your World Through Frequencies, we're discussing, do you know when you diva?
Something that I find particularly juicy. And in the last year, I've seen it a lot in a lot of people. And of course, I'm always checking myself to see if it's coming in me as well. But I would umbrella this pattern or behavior as self-entitlement. And I would love to unpack why that even exists in the collective, because there's a lot of people seem to have this pattern, including myself. And I'd love to know, like, how do we work through that? Why we have it? And, what's the impact of this? Just understand it a little bit more.
Yeah, totally. I think it's a really great question because I feel like it's been increasing since polarity has been on the rise. And, as you would say, people are being a little bit naughty,
A little bit.
Yeah. So to me, I'll just start talking about the consequences of self-entitlement, because most people don't really, I'm going to back up even further and say most people who are self-entitled don't even really realize that they are being that way.
Oh, yeah.
It's really easy to see it in other people. You're like, oh, wow, doesn't she think that she's really important because that person's being demanding or feels they have a right to my time or whatever it is. But it's harder to be aware of it in ourselves. So I thought I would talk a little bit about the consequences of it. So why do we care, that when we're acting self-entitled, like how does it impact us?
Yeah.
So I think it impacts us in a number of levels. The first is it can create, it's interesting, when we're entitled or self-entitled or however you want to call it, we can get we can drop in our frequency bandwidth a lot. And we're very much in what I would call our little s self, the perspective of the ego mind, right? Because it's all about me, my needs, what I think is right, what I think I deserve, what should be accessible to me. It's very much through that filter of the small s or the little s self. And it's often based in scarcity, right? It's like, I deserve to have more of something, right? So it's kind of a weird, odd pattern that shows up often in terms of lack. Like I need to have more attention. I need to have more time. I need to have more whatever it is, money, whatever it is, you know, like more free treats at Costco, whatever it is. You know what I mean? Like,
And sugar-free.
yeah, exactly. Sugar-free,
wheat
samples.
free, gluten-free. Yeah,
Exactly. And it's all about my needs.
exactly.
Right? Exactly, right? So to me, that's where it comes from. It's when you anchor into the little s self and you're not really being mindful of your impact on others.
That's the biggest part that I've noticed. It's people seem to be unaware of the impact it has on the people around them when they're in that pattern.
Totally.
And the shocking part for me is that they don't even recognize the subtlety and nuances of that pattern.
Yeah.
And it's like, and when you're on the outside looking in, it's how can you not see?
Yeah.
But then, you know, I know I'm doing it as well. And
Yeah.
oops, you
Yeah.
know, I didn't see it either.
Exactly. And you know, it's funny because when we're in that pattern, and we all do it, right? Because, you know, it's part of humanness.
Yeah.
And what can happen though is as the person who is running the pattern, you can start to feel like people are slighting you or, you know, get bitter or get resentful towards people because you feel you should have access to whatever it is and they're not giving it to you.
Yeah, and it feels like it triggers a lot of stuff as well. When I'm in it,
Yeah.
and I feel like I'm not getting it, you know, and I want it now, and why are they ignoring me? And oh, I'm being rejected, and it's like a spiral downwards.
Yeah.
And I found myself thinking, where does this come from?
Yeah.
You know, where does it come from?
Yeah. So I feel like it comes from patterns of scarcity and also very low self-worth. So those two are the things because a lot of times people will start to feel like it will trigger the I'm not important. And then when the I'm not important starts to get loud, people will start to act on that even more. So they try to compensate for it. Does that make sense? Like they're ignoring me, I'm not important. Okay, well then I'll make them pay attention to me. You know, it's kind of a weird dynamic that can happen there.
And that's when you get the,
Yeah.
excuse me.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. Yeah, and a lot more drama.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just, it's funny, and the other pattern that comes up is righteousness.
Oh.
Which is kind of interesting that pattern evolves. It's like this little package that happens, I find, with self-entitlement. It's not like one pattern.
No.
It's like a cascade of patterns. And the other one is, like I said, righteousness. Like, I am correct. I am right. My viewpoint. It's like you should place a crown on someone's head, you know? It's like, my viewpoint is the one that's correct. And then we're very vulnerable because we're in that pattern of you know, people criticizing us because we're becoming more and more unstable. We're becoming more and more caught in these distortion patterns, more and more up in our heads. And like I said, in that perspective of the little s self. And so we're very vulnerable to people's criticisms or judgments, or even our perception of their judgment, which is interesting. They may not even be judging you at all, but there we are in our patterns. And now all of a sudden we think that they're whatevering. So,
Oh, I'd love to share a story.
yeah, please.
Yeah, just when you said that, because I had an incident at one point, and I'd gone away for the weekend, and I hadn't been there to respond to a person, and they'd messaged me and they'd emailed me, and then they started to get abusive. You know, I found this when I got back, of course, and it started as "Can you?" and it ended up as "How dare you not take me seriously?" You know, and you know, I'd been away the whole weekend. I hadn't seen one of the messages, and I thought, "Wow."
Yeah.
You know, and that's how fast it happens.
Yeah. Yeah. And it had nothing to do, I mean, you weren't deliberately trying to ignore this person at all.
I wasn't there.
You just weren't even there. And that's the interesting thing about that perspective is that we can create this idea that you take it personally. Does that make sense? Like it's being like that action, your non-action is directed personally to them. It had nothing to do with them.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean by you're very mired in the small little s self.
Self, yeah.
Just it's like all about you. It has nothing to do with you.
And that protection,
Yeah.
you know, because I don't want you hurting me. How do you reject me?
Yeah, yeah. So it's that low self-worth pattern. So all that stuff starts to spiral and amplifies itself, and it gets really loud, right? Because all these distortion patterns are cascading together and amplifying each other, and it gets louder and louder and louder and louder. So what's interesting about self-entitlement that I've noticed also is that it there's very little accountability on the person, on the person's part. Like they don't really recognize what's happening. And the thing about accountability and being aware of what you're doing is it's critical in order to accelerate on frequency level or on spirit level.
Oh, yeah.
Right? If you're not mindful of what you're doing, if you aren't being aware, self-aware, then you can't catch your distortion patterns and you can't remove them. And as a result, you don't go anywhere. You just stay at the same frequency resonance over and over and over again.
Recycling the same
patterns.
Yeah.
And you create more of the same reality. And more people don't respond to you in the way you want, so you go cycling back into that distortion pattern of self-entitlement, and then you have all this, like, you're stuck in your little S. You see what I'm saying? That reality just like keeps creating itself over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So
yeah, because they're feeding into what you're saying. So, you know, when I saw these emails, I responded very gently and said, no, this is not personal. I just haven't been here. This is the first time I'm seeing your messages. So please, you know, don't take... I got no response, just asking the question again. I thought, okay, so how do we, as you're saying, the looping, it's a small L self, it's a lineage pattern, a cultural pattern, a programming society?
yeah, well, you know, it's interesting. I feel like it's a pretty fundamental human pattern because it's linked into the mind.
So it's still coming back.
It's still coming back to the mind. So can it be louder in some people because of the lineage? Absolutely. Okay, and it depends. What's interesting to me is it happens a lot in lineage patterns, especially if there has been some disempowerment in that lineage.
Oh,
so
from
in some way. So for example, if females have been really disempowered, for example, in that particular lineage or that particular culture, I've noticed that entitlement can get very loud. Does that make sense? Because that's their way to assert their power. It's to go into this sort of like louder, like demanding, more active, more sort of like aggressive way of claiming their right to what they feel they don't really have access to. Does that make sense?
Totally.
So that can happen in certain cultures.
Kind of like overcompensating?
Overcompensating. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's kind of interesting to watch that. It's almost like again, I know it sounded weird that I started with scarcity, but it's like if you don't feel like you're empowered and you have to like hustle to like claim what you have access to. You know, it's like, oh, I'm not gonna have access to it. So I'm gonna have to be a little bit more demanding, a little bit louder. Like the squeaky wheel.
Yeah.
You know, what is it? The squeaky wheel gets the attention or whatever. I don't know, it's like something about a squeaky
if you
wheel.
yell louder.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? You're the one who gets, I don't know why grease is particularly good in this case, but like, but in this particular case, if you're louder, then you won't be overlooked because you will be given, if you're just quiet and complacent, then who's going to pay attention to you and give you your due, right? You have to be loud in order to be seen so that you can get access to whatever it is you need access to.
What you think you're scarce in.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So say I'm a person watching this discussion and I'm wanting to check myself out to sort of see, well, do I run them patterns? I don't think so.
Yeah.
How would I recognize it? Like in my daily actions, you know, do you have any kind of tips or ideas or how I could watch myself or ascertain when I'm being a bit of a diva, you know,
totally.
Self-entitled little diva?
Well, we all do, you know, we all have our moments.
Yeah.
And I just want to reinforce to people, the reason self-entitlement is really important to watch for is because it's easy when you're in it to not be aware that you're in it. And then you get locked into the little s self perspective instead of being able to have the bigger and the more highly resonant or highly vibrating perspective of the big S self, right? Of you as consciousness, which is not very concerned about lack. It's you know what I mean? It has a different, bigger perspective. And so in that perspective of consciousness where you are infinite, there is no lack. You know, you don't need to prove anything or be really loud to deserve to get something. You see what I'm saying? You don't need self-entitlement at that perspective because you have access to everything.
So I would probably take what you've said from my understanding and probably say something like, I'm not looking for that outside validation anymore. Is that the similar kind of thing you're saying? Or is that just...
Yeah, because you don't need, so yes, actually, so we're saying something slightly different, but your point is excellent, which is when you are in the big S perspective and when you are internally strong enough, you don't need validation from someone else, right? You know that you have access to whatever you need and you understand your ability to co-create. Okay, so it's very different. That perspective is not based in scarcity.
Yeah.
So that's a really different perspective, and one which is very freeing, because then you don't care so much about what other people think of you.
Yeah.
And you don't have to like try so hard to manipulate other people to get what you think you need or what you
Yes.
think you want or whatever.
Yeah.
And so because that perspective is so much bigger, it's more generous.
Mm-hmm.
It's more inclusive, and it's more aware of its impact on everything. You know, when we start to have that perspective of consciousness, you're aware of how your actions ripple out into everything,
Oh, yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so there's a consequence to that, you know. And in any case, I would say that how you know, to get back to your question, which was more direct, which is how do you know that you're in it? If you notice that it's like you're trying to get someone to do something all the time. So it's a form of control. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you're trying to get someone to respond. So whatever it is, meaning like you're trying to guilt them, you're trying to scold them into it, how dare you? So if you go into those kind of behaviors where you're trying to control the person because you feel like you want a certain outcome, one question you might want to ask yourself is like, okay, wait a minute. Am I being entitled here? Like, do I really have a right to be demanding this from this person?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's good, because I mean, I could use that language. So what I'm hearing you say is, if I'm starting to use that language, whether it's internally or externally, then maybe take a step back and say, well, hang on, is this me just requiring something in that moment, or is this me moved into my small s self, feeling this lack or scarcity, and now I'm trying to control?
Control, yes.
Because I mean, I have kids, so you know, there are times when I say, "Get your washing,"
Yes.
you know, but that's different,
Yes.
right, from what you were actually saying. It's you've moved in. It's an intent. And is there a physical response at the same time? Just as I'm saying it, you know, when I'm moving into that kind of language, where I'm, you know, listen, you know,
Yeah.
there's like a physical response as well, as opposed to when I'm telling my kids, get your washing now.
Yeah, right. Being a mom. Yeah, certain things have to be done. But I don't feel like, and I feel like for a lot of people who have self-entitlement, it's not everybody, but a lot of people, they'll have like a contraction in their heart space or in their solar plexus because they're trying to get something to happen, because they feel it should be a certain way. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And people are not doing what they feel should happen.
That's perfect.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that happens a lot. And, you know, I'm not in the inbox that much in customer service for Spherical Luminosity. We have a whole team that deals with the emails that we get from our clients. But I do get forwarded sometimes people's, let's call them requests. And I remember we had one person who had these escalating requests for what it is they felt we should be doing. You know, they felt like, because one of the things was, you know, our meditation time that we were giving for, you know, tens, if not 100 people, should be moved because it didn't meet her schedule, you know, or that, you know, she felt like she wanted to have a different time for an individual appointment, but it was already taken. But she really wanted us to kick someone else out of the appointment so that, you know, she could have it.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, that's quite demanding. And there was like a whole slew of, let's call them requests from this person.
When I was listening to you, what it actually brought up for me as well is, okay, so we all can be in that moment of being, you know, self-entitled. But it's also recognizing when somebody has that expectation of us, you know, when we're meeting somebody full on that's in that self-entitled mode.
Yeah.
And how do we work with that person?
Yeah.
Because no doubt, you know.
Yeah.
There's lots of them out there.
Oh, there's lots. And as I said, because polarization is going up, they're getting louder.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
The demands are not softening. Increasing.
Yeah.
So I would say this is a really opportune moment for you to hold your space. Okay? Because it's really about being in your center, and you're like, okay, you're having your experience over there. You're trying to push into my space with whatever your demands are. So you can have your demands, and I don't have to meet them. Be okay with what it is that I'm able to offer. That's okay. So that's part of holding your space and also being neutral, right? It's just like, okay, well, if they need to go away because I am not able or willing to do whatever they are, let's call it requesting or demanding, then the fact that they go away is okay. So meaning addressing the distortion patterns of fear of loss, coming into more neutrality, you know? And it's sort of like we don't know what lessons they're meant to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And they are meant to have whatever experience they have. And so to know that in all of that, also to have compassion.
Yeah.
But I don't mean compassion and then therefore they're allowed to run over you.
Yeah.
I mean, like, wow, to see them as a human being who is having all these challenges
Mm-hmm.
and to be like, wow, those are difficult choices that they're making.
Yeah.
And chances are this person is experiencing it not just with me,
Mm-hmm.
but with multiple people
Yeah.
in their lives. And that probably translates into not a great experience for them.
Yeah.
And it's not like, they're such a cow, they deserve that. It's not about that. It's more like that sucks for them
Yeah.
because that's what they're creating in their life. And they cannot come into my space. Like, that's fine that they demand that.
Yeah.
But that is not allowed. And I'm not going to drop my frequency resonance because they demand it.
Yeah. And because there's 2 points in there that I want to connect with.
Yeah.
One of them, like you just finished there saying, they don't get to come into my space.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I'm in that big S self, I'm enough.
Yes,
Right? So
exactly.
I don't feel that lack.
Yeah.
And when I'm in that big S self, I also recognize that I too can be
Yes.
that person. So yeah, there is a way to function in this reality at the moment where there is this polarity and this pattern seems to be showing its face a
Yeah.
lot. So you're saying, to summarize, hold your space,
Yeah.
be neutral,
Mm-hmm.
and what was the last part? Or was there a last part?
And to have compassion.
And
for
have
their
compassion.
Yes. So, and that, again, I just want to emphasize, a lot of times compassion is confused with allowing someone to roll over you,
Yeah.
right? Because like you feel bad for them, whatever. I don't mean feel bad. I mean like, wow, the choices they are making are creating hardship for them.
Mm.
And that is the journey that they are choosing. That sucks as a journey.
Yeah.
Okay, that
yeah.
sucks as an experience. So it means that you understand them, but it's not like you open your heart to them because you feel bad for them. You should feel guilty or something like that because they're not getting in their way. Do you see what I'm saying?
Totally.
So I just mean compassion from the sense of, I see where they're coming from. I recognize that sometimes I do that too, maybe not to that extent, but I do that too.
Yeah.
And that's not okay in terms of them trying to control me or trying to get me to do anything. You're just solid in yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And if you are curious about holding your space, there's episode 120 called Steady She Goes, Holding Your Space. That's always a good one.
Yeah.
If you don't really know what that means. But we did a whole episode on holding your space and what that means. Because some people, in the face of dealing with someone else who's self-entitled. People who are self-entitled try to push into everyone's space. So if you can't hold your space, they're going to keep pushing into yours. They're going to find people who they can cow. You know what I mean? Like who they can push into their frequencies into their space because it works.
Yeah.
So the more you hold your space, the less they're going to want to be in your field.
Yeah.
Really, because they're not going to get what they want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So practice holding the space.
Yes.
Right. That's going to be a big one.
Yeah, it is. And for some
especially right now.
Yeah. And I think that for some people, you have people in your lives that do that all the time, who are very entitled, very demanding, very angry, very whatever, fill in the blank. And as hard as it is, I mean, they are an interesting opportunity, even though challenging, to hold your space. And they're probably there for you to strengthen at this time.
Just going to say, to help you strengthen. Especially I find the hardest is the closer relationships. Like
for sure.
husband, children.
Parents.
Yeah.
Siblings. Close friends. Whatever it is. It doesn't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. Those are the hardest ones for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks for that. That is super helpful. I'm going to be able to watch how to recognize it and then know exactly what the next step is for me to do.
Yeah.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
You're welcome. Yeah. And for those of you who are wanting to not only just have a mental understanding, which this discussion is, but actually to do the work to release the distortion patterns so that you can hold your space more easily and to clear these self-entitlement patterns out from yourself so that you can be higher in your resonance and be able to access more of your big S self, I'd recommend that you listen to the GFC, or Group Frequency Calibration meditation, associated with this episode. That's where all the magic happens and where the work happens. And if you've enjoyed this particular episode of Mastering Your World Through Frequencies, please subscribe to our channel by clicking on the red subscribe button below. We're about to start the Group Frequency Calibration, or GFC, where we actually do the frequency work and where change is catalyzed. To get to the GFC, click on the square that'll appear to the right or the link in the description below. It's time to bring in a new experience, a new consciousness, and a new world. Let's rise together.